Hello humans! Today I wanted to talk about this guy right here. So this is the Boker Plus Haddock in D2 steel. This was actually a limited edition knife that they made for, or that they sold as part of their 2024 Advent Calendar series. So every year for the last couple years, I know they've done at least 3 years now, Boker has done an advent calendar where you get different parts of a knife over the course of the advent calendar days. You also usually get some other unique gifts or fun things. This one here came with a challenge coin, a a neck warmer, and a Work Sharp outdoor sharpener and knife maintenance tool, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so it came up with a couple of different things that were actually pretty helpful. Everything you need to assemble the knife actually comes as part of the kit, and you get to configure it however you want. So there's always a couple of different options in terms of how you want the knife to look. So obviously you have different pocket clip or thumb stud options. I'm probably not going to switch. Yeah, let's play. So the knife itself, that's a T7, that's a T8. Oh wait, no, these are all T6s, aren't they? Yeah. All of the outer pieces are all held together with T6s. I believe the pivot, the actual pivot underneath the bolster is a T8. But everything else on this is T6, which is kind of annoying, especially because, like, you do get some bits with this. You get this little tool, but this is not the best bit in the world. It didn't break on me, but I didn't use it very much. So T6s, when you have to assemble it yourself, definitely feels like a bit of a riskier choice. Probably not the decision I personally would have made. But it is technically a decision that you can make. So you can very, very easily pull off, let's say, the bolster. And let's say you wanted to switch out just the bolsters and the bolster hardware. So what we're going to do is we're going to take out these really nicely, I don't know how they're anodized, but they're actually, I think they're really nice looking bolsters. We're going to take those out. And we're going to take two of these screws. So we're trying to find, in specific, two shorter screws. So you do get all of the different hardware that you need in order to do this. It is kind of easy to lose, and you do get two sets. But if you lose some of the hardware from, like, the silver set, for example, you do not get more of the silver set hardware. You get the blue set, the anodized set's hardware. There we are. So we're just going to slot this in. So in terms of bolsters, we have two different sets of bolsters, two different sets of hardware, two different pocket clips, and a plate if you don't want a pocket clip. The plate does only come in this gray color. I'll put it on in just a minute. As it is right now, I have another blue coated pocket clip in there right now. It's a very, very simple folded steel pocket clip. It does work. It's not uncomfortable in the hand, to be honest. I don't really feel it in my hand or anything like that. It is a little bit wider, so aesthetically some people aren't going to be the biggest fans of it. But I personally actually think it looks quite nice. So we're just going to keep taking this right here out. We're talking about a lot of stuff around kind of the experience and what you get for it, and that is definitely the big draw. So this is, I believe, 240 Canadian dollars is what these guys cost as part of the whole kit. And really and truly what you are getting out of this is the experience of putting it together. The material itself, you get one set of copper bolsters. The copper bolsters are actually kind of nice. You get one set of this sort of tumble grade steel bolsters, and they are in fact steel. They are magnetic. Which, I mean, they do look quite nice. They are a very, very nice color. You get 2 different D2 steel blades. Here's the other one. You get wooden scales. I believe they're Coca-Cola wood. You also get a set of carbon fiber scales and a set of milled G10 scales. These ones here are... I wish these were aluminum, to be honest. I think that these in aluminum would be super, super cool. But they are not, unfortunately. These also don't work with bolsters, which should be pretty obvious. They will give you the most traction, if traction or grip is something you care about. I never use these. On very rare occasions, I will switch out the wood for the carbon fiber and go for like a grayer, blacker kind of thing. This is also a really nice looking configuration. My favorite is absolutely the wood and copper. But that's not to make the claim that it is perfect by any means. It is just what I like the most, and aesthetics are inherently personal. We also get a bunch of different options for the thumb studs. The thumb studs only work on one blade. So as you can see here, this blade is designed for nail nick. The nail nick, I'll get into the nail nick when I swap out the blades and I start talking about like experience and use and stuff like that, but it has a nail nick. This version right here, rather than a nail nick, has a thumb stud. It is a backlock system. It's a very, very stiff system. So it actually does take a pretty substantial amount of effort. Mine's broken in a decent amount over the last few months, but it does take a decent amount of effort to get it going, and I've never really been able to consistently get it to flick open. So this has always been a slow rolling knife, which, if you're looking at this kind of like a gentleman's knife, could actually be a benefit to it. The fact that it does not have that fidget factor, the fact that it is a little bit more restrained, is definitely something that could be seen as being gentlemanly. Why am I having trouble with these screws? Who knows? Sorry about this, I'm just trying to get the wood scale off so I can show you what it looks like with the carbon fiber. For some reason... Okay, that one just came out. There's more spinning than there should be. It's stripped, I swear if it's stripped. I'm going to be deeply disappointed. There we are. It's not stripped, it was just hanging out. Oh, it's stuck in the wood. That actually makes sense. As you can see on the inside here, the actual hardware for the knife is all internal, and you can actually, technically, run the knife without any of the exterior hardware on. The only thing you're going to run into as an issue there is the bolsters or the front of this G10 scale are what actually holds the backstop in place, because there is an internal pin up here that is being held in place by these front bolsters. But you can, technically speaking, run the knife without it. It's just not as good. Let me just put on... The scales are, of course, side sensitive. They will only work in one orientation. Yeah, for a thumb stud, we have different choices. Obviously, we have a plain gray choice. We also have festive red and green, because this is, of course, you know, part of an advent calendar case. So you end up with Christmas connotations. And then on top of that, you have blue and purple, which I think are both there to match this more anodized, the anodized aesthetic that you get. Which I think is pretty cool. I do really like the way the purple looks. Scale in there. Yep. I do actually really like the way that the purple looks with the thumb stud. but depending on what you like and what hardware and all the other stuff you're using, like this is actually a really nicely colored red, and I did have the red on there over Christmas time, and it looks quite nice. It is just a coating of some sort. It will wear away a little bit with time. Throughout my experiences, it hasn't worn away super badly, but it does still technically wear away a little bit with time. So here we have our full plate. Like I said, this comes in just the steel, or at least I only got the steel colored version, slight tumbling. Both of the blades are very beautifully tumbled, and both of the blades have full height flat grinds, which, despite the fact that this is a pretty thick knife, and I'll get into how thick when I start getting into dimensioning and stuff like that, despite the fact that it does have a fairly thick blade, this is a very slicey knife, which is all pretty nice. Obviously that means that there's going to be something going on where it's probably not the strongest, the toughest actual edge because of how thin it is behind the edge, but purely in terms of a slice, actually, this is a fresh from factory blade. I haven't swapped it in for anything more than fondling. So let's do that. Let me just grab a piece of paper. Not that one, this one. And let's just, pour on that one. It is a very, very slicey knife. And a fairly sharp knife too, but just purely in terms of like slicing, going through cardboard and stuff like that, this is beautiful. Now that I do have the blade swapped out, let me just, yeah, it gets to be a mess. Now that I do have the blade swaps out, let me talk a little bit about one of my biggest issues with this knife, and that is the placement of this nail nick. This nail nick is very, very high up on the blade, giving you very poor leverage. With the nail nick in, I actually ended up using it more just as a straight pull. So I think it would have been a lot better to either have a long pull or to put the nail nick a little bit further out, even up here near kind of the hump of the blade, just to maximize your leverage and make this a little bit easier to use. Now, because it is hot swappable, and because of the fact that you do actually end up with a very, very travel safe blade, like this is a blade that is designed or is compatible with most European knife laws, you get put in this situation where this makes a very, very attractive traveling option, because it really and truly is legal most places. You just leave that blade at home or in your backpack or whatever. But the big thing is that in order to travel with it, you do need to have a checked bag. That's not going to be a big issue for most people traveling to Europe. But if you're like me, I hate traveling and not having to take all of the dangerous items out of my pockets. I have actually traveled with this, where I've just taken the blade out and put the blade in a backpack, check bag, and ran without it, which works. So it's an Anso of Denmark design. My family's Danish. I think that's super duper cool. We have a lot of belly, despite still having a pretty accessible tip. This is kind of a modified sheep's foot blade, but because of the extra belly, it puts the tip in a very usable place for draw cuts or even just detail work with the tip, which I am very, very much appreciative of. Let's take a look. Let's do some size comparisons here. Which is going to involve me having to clear out space. I'm not switching over the thumb stud because, quite frankly, it tightens down a lot more than anything else does, and it's a bit of a pain in the ass to switch out. So we're not going to bother. But we'll create a little bit of space here, and here it is next to the Civivi Chevalier and the Wee Knives Banter. And as you can see, it is almost exactly the same size as the Civivi Chevalier, putting it very, very comfortably into what I consider to be a medium-sized knife. For being a medium-sized knife, it is a little bit heavier than most, but it is very, very much a medium-sized knife nonetheless. And here it is next to a buck 110 and a Zippo. As you can see, it is a decent amount shorter than the buck 110 in terms of its thickness. Again, it's going to be a pretty substantial object in the hand, in part because of everything they had to do to make it so modular. And the two bolsters will affect the size ever so slightly. I believe the... Oh, maybe not. Maybe it just feels like it. The gray steel version feels thicker than the copper version, but that might not actually be the case. And of course, the Mill G10 will just change the dimensions. It is ever so slightly thinner than the buck 110, but really not by all that much. This is a very, very similar size in terms of thickness. All right. Let's check our blade stock thickness. So purely as far as like value for money goes, this really doesn't have that much. It's D2 steel. Why is this in millimeters? It's D2 steel for $240. There's a lot out there that gets you a better deal. That's like super steel territory. You can legitimately get super steels in around that. So 170 thousandths. Oh, maybe I can get 165 thousandths. So on the actual maximum thickness of the blade, I can get down to about 165 thousandths. Which, let's just do millimeters. Somebody was bitching about that however long ago. I don't want fractions. So, 4.2 millimeters. Which, I mean, yeah, it's definitely going to be a little bit thicker. But because of how tall the blade is, even at its like thinnest point back here, because of how tall the blade is and because of the fact that it is a true full height flat grind, it does a really, really good job getting thin behind the edge. This, despite how thick it is, this thing's top scoring point is 100% its sliciness, which is just kind of cool. You have a little bit of a choke up spot up here, but it really doesn't give you much more than a little bit of extra fine control because it'll butt your finger right up against the blade, which can be a little bit off. Ergonomically, it's quite comfortable. It does have a slight curve to it overall, which if you have thick fingers might make you feel a little bit cramped. I never found it particularly bad. And again, because of the way the blade sweeps here, I found it really nice to put my thumb kind of anywhere along here if I needed to bear down into a cut, or if I needed to place a finger on it to get more access to that tip and a little bit of extra control, which I think is pretty damn cool. In terms of buy recommendations, this one here is kind of difficult because, like I said, this is a bad value proposition for a knife, but it's a good value proposition in terms of all the different stuff you get. You get a lot of different stuff. It is all quite well made. And I mean, you get two blades, you get almost two knives worth of stuff here. You don't get a second frame. You do get extra hardware, but you don't get a second frame and you don't get a second lock. Other than that, you get at least two complete knives here, right? Which is pretty cool. But it does fall into this like weird, how do you feel like it's worth it? So for me, this is an experience thing. There's two things you're getting out of this. One, the experience, the opening up a new bit every day, and even though you kind of know what you're getting at the end, it is still pretty cool, and they do an okay job of hiding all of the different things that you get in your pack. So that, for me at least, is pretty cool. The other thing is you get a lot of customizability, right? You get to make this look however you want. And in my opinion, with the wood scales and the copper bolsters, this is probably the most aesthetically pleasing knife I think I own right now. At the very least for folders, it is. Which is super duper cool. You have more traditional options, less traditional options, which again, like I'm just a very big options person. I think it is really, really cool in that regard. and you can have this feel like you have more knives than you actually have. So on balance, I do think that it's not necessarily the best value for money, and there's a couple of things that would have been nice. For example, titanium bolsters instead of the gray steel ones. That would have been nice. Titanium pocket clip instead of a couple different steel ones. That would have been nice, right? Little tiny details that I feel like would be nice. But at the same time, this definitely doesn't feel like bad value once you consider everything you get and what you consider what you're really paying for, which is the design and the experience of it. So yeah, overall, I'm really happy with this. I think this is super duper cool, and it's a nice knife. It's pleasant to use. It's very comfortable, despite how thick it is. It feels very slicey, good for some food prep tasks, good at just general knife stuff, which is what you want a knife to do. It is not very fidget friendly. If you're somebody for whom fidget factor is a big thing, this was not going to be the knife for you. The other one, I think, was the Mini Atlas button lock. Would probably be a little bit more your speed, but I'm somebody who's very comfortable carrying a Buck 110 around for a day, or the 722 Spitfire, or even like there's some cold steels I have. I have a decent number of knives that are very old-fashioned. I carry Opinels on occasion, for God's sake. So for me, the fidget factor side of it is nice, but is not end-all be-all. And this isn't an unpleasant knife to manipulate. It is, once it breaks in. At the start, it was a little bit grindy, but now that it's broken in quite a bit, it feels very, very smooth. It might not be the absolute pinnacle of like fidget factor, but it is very, very smooth hydraulic action, which is quite nice. And it does in fact center. I mean, this is going to depend a little bit on your own personal centering abilities, but you know, you can get it center and the action is good with it centered. If you ease it off, the action doesn't get any better because most of what is making the action stiff is kind of operating as backlock. So there is that, but yeah, it doesn't have bolster, or it doesn't have bearings or bushings or anything like that in the pivot, which would probably increase its smoothness a little bit, but the trade-off for not having, just put that back in there, the trade-off for not having any type of pivot, what would you call that, action? Pivot aids is what I'm going to call it. Not having any pivot aid is the fact that you do get the quick swap blade, which is pretty damn nice. So yeah, for what you get and everything else, I do think it's good value. I do think it requires somebody who is interested in having something like this, and interested enough to like dedicate 24 days, 25 days to opening a piece a day, because that definitely enhances the experience. If you and your partner are both interested in knives and customizing knives and stuff like that, this is definitely, there's two, right? There's this one here and the Mini Atlas. I definitely think it is worth picking up, and I think they've done two in previous years as well. Pick up one of each, and then each of you gets a really cool knife at the end of it, and you get to share the experience, which is totally what this is all about. Yeah, I think this is really, really nice. It's a fun knife to use. It's an easy knife to use. It's not necessarily anything that's like my absolute favorite in the world, but when you put it all together, I feel like it is more than the sum of its parts, which is pretty cool. The biggest change I would make design-wise is the position of the nail nick. I would move it down, or I would put in a long pull. And other than that, the biggest change I would make is probably just a little bit of upgrades on like the accessories, just because it would be nice. But as a package, this is definitely everything you could want. So yeah, worth picking up whatever they come out with next year. Stay safe and have fun out there. Peace.